All right, and I think we're going to start getting started with some of that introductory material and introducing all of our speakers before we begin tonight's panel. Hello, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're coming in to join this call today. And thank you very much for joining us here at Data Dryad and SORTEE for Love Data Week 2026. My name is Saoirse Kelleher. I'm the chair of SORTEE's Education and Outreach Committee, which runs our workshop and webinar series. And for our first event of the year, we're very excited to be collaborating with Data Dryad to co-host this panel on the present and future of data. In case you haven't come across us at SORTEE before, we are the Society for Open, Reliable, and Transparent Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. Society was created back in 2020 with the aim of bringing together researchers working to improve reliability and transparency through cultural and institutional changes in ecology, evolutionary biology, and related fields. This workshop is open to everyone, but if you are not a member of SORTEE and you do want to join, it's easy and you can do so at the link I'll put in the chat in a moment. But for tonight's event, I'm very happy to briefly introduce the host of our panel, Meyer Guerrero from Data Dryad, and our four panelists. Richard Sever, the Chief Science Officer and Strategy Officer from OpenRXiv, Jennifer Meyer, the Senior Managing Editor at the British Ecological Society Journals, Wei Mun Chan, the Research Integrity Manager at eLife, and Brooke Longfox, the Data Curation Expert at Morphobank. Thank you all for making the time in your busy schedules to join us tonight for this event. So thanks again to our friends at Data Dryad who've helped pull all of this together. It's I Love Data Week, and in celebration and acknowledgement of that, we've brought together these organizations within the scholarly communications ecosystem that are each approaching data from a different angle and a different perspective. Our goal in this panel is to explore the role of data at the raw expression of our research findings and potentially as a reusable component of research. So we're asking things like, what's the value, what are the risks, and how do we remove barriers for researchers to make sharing data less demanding? With that, I'm going to be handing things off to Marie Guerrero to kick our panel off and introduce our panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Saoirse, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for making the time to join today, especially our panelists. I'm really excited to have a variety of perspectives available to cover the important topic of research data and open data. And before we start the conversation, I would like to echo some of the things that Saoirse has said. It's real. This week is Love Data Week. It's been an international endeavor that has been running for a few years now, really with the objective of thinking about how to shed light into the practice of sharing data. And this year's theme is where is the data? So the encouragement has been to think about a way to get people to really consider the journey that goes from collecting data, storing data, preserving it, and making it publicly available whenever possible. So we know there is a plethora of options available for people to share data: institutional repositories, subject-specific databases, or generalist data publishing platforms like Dryad. But we know from various reports and also from talking to researchers that there is still some apprehension about sharing data, often sharing data publicly. We know that some people may fear that their data will be taken away, taken elsewhere, may generate a publication in a top-tier journal. But generally, researchers feel that it's an onerous process, it's time-consuming, even though they know it's good for science to share their data. The State of Open Data report from this year that has just been released like 2 weeks ago, it's probably the biggest audit on data sharing practices. It's a report that has been running for 10 years now, emphasizes yet another year that awareness of good practices around sharing data. So many of you have probably come across the FAIR principles, so that data should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. This report emphasizes that awareness and enthusiasm for those practices has grown in the past few years, but there are still significant structural barriers for people to share data, in particular around recognition, credit, and visibility for sharing data, but equally important technical support. So it will be really interesting today to also discuss a little bit more with the panel on what ideas they may have from the various organizations they represent to make this process as smooth as possible for researchers. And an important point as well is that even though we haven't shared as much data in volume as we have to date, so there is a pool of significant open data available, we're still lacking the mechanisms to reuse data effectively and to have data ingested in machines in a seamless way that it enables machines to run analysis, but also for humans to access those data and potentially query them in different ways. So today we want to talk about how the process of sharing data, publishing and preserving can be made simpler for researchers. And I appreciate we do have quite a few researchers in the audience today, so we'll also look forward to hearing your views. And of course, the topic of AI and ingesting data or creating data using AI tools will also come up. We are allocating roughly 30 minutes for the panel discussion. But if you have any pressing comments or reactions, please do start posting your messages on the chat, and we may feed those to the panel as they fit the topics of the discussions we're having. Otherwise, we'll have at least 15 minutes at the end to go through questions and comments. And because it's a relatively informal audience and crew, if you're willing, it would be great if you could also raise your hand at that point of the meeting and share your video if possible, and if you feel comfortable doing so. So without further ado, I'll invite my set of stellar panelists to introduce themselves. I appreciate that I haven't introduced myself either properly, so I'm just going to share. I'm head of partnership development at Dryad. Dryad is a generalist data publishing platform. It's been running for around 18 years, is a not-for-profit, community-driven organization that primarily works with researchers who are keen to share their data, but equally works with academic institutions and publishers who believe in the mission and practice of sharing data openly, and importantly, are willing to support the costs of making those data sets publicly available so that researchers do not take the costs themselves. We curate data sets, and I appreciate that my colleague in the panel, Brooke, will have some views on the importance of data curation as well. And we make the data sets openly and globally available. So that's a little bit about myself, and I would encourage my colleagues in the panel to also introduce themselves, but also say a little bit more about the roles they have in their organizations, and importantly, how does data fit in within your role at the organization and generally in the organization as an endeavor. Jenny, can I ask you to go first?
Hi, so my name is Jenny Meyer, and I'm a senior managing editor for the British Ecological Society. So I look after three of the BES's 7 journals. Um, and I would say that as a society journal, um, we were in the very fortunate position of having backup to put our money where our mouth was when we moved to mandate data archiving, which we did some years ago. Um, from a journal perspective, I would say that journals are kind of the stick that forces people to archive their data and make it public. Everyone knows they should, almost everyone knows they should be archiving their data in a safe, reusable, in accordance with FAIR principles. It's very easy on any given day to not do that until the time comes when something says your paper will not be published until you have done this. That's one of the things that journals do. As part of the British Ecological Society, data archiving is considered very much a necessary component of our principles. Ecology is a science of the world, and you don't get to rerun a year, you don't get to regrow a forest. You have the data that you have, and that data has to sustain you and all of your peers forever. Um, you can't go back in time for it. Yeah, so I would say that as a society member, data is important because it keeps, as a journal, we kind of present a strong incentive for people to make their data archived. Also, as a journal, it's one of the ways in which we can help create a robust scientific publishing system. There are mandating publishing your data does help prevent bad actors in the system from easily continuing with the effects of publishing bad science. Yeah. Shall I pass over to Wei Mun Chan?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. So Wei Mun Chan, Research Integrity Manager at eLife. So I oversee the integrity of articles that we publish at eLife. So eLife is a non-profit organization, and we're committed to making peer review and publishing better for science. So our publishing model kind of differs from the traditional journal in that we don't accept or reject papers after peer review. Rather, every paper we publish, we review as a review preprint. So data is important to us in the sense that it helps us ensure transparency, reproducibility, and allows researchers to reuse the findings from the studies that we publish. Key to these studies is that data is important in the sense that it also kind of backs up the claims of the study. And as a research integrity specialist, if post-publication questions arise about articles that are submitted, that are published by us, then if we have access to data, that helps support the integrity of the scholarly record. So for me, data, I deal with data on a day-to-day basis, so it's very important to us as a journal.
Thank you, Wei Mun. Brooke, do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you, everyone. So I am Brooke Longfox, and I work for Morphobank, which is a small specialized data repository. It is currently hosted at Phoenix Bioinformatics, which is a nonprofit, and they took over a couple years ago from a university that housed the repository. Their repository is very specialized. It's for a specific type of morphological data used for phylogenetic analyses. It holds images, character matrices, and different information about morphology related to specimens. What we do there is make sure that the data is fair, it's reusable, it's cited, and what we're trying to do is make sure that future research can look back at the data in the repository to validate previous research and to build on future trees. And basically, we're ensuring that this data is used for publications and that it is fair and open as well. Do we want to go ahead to Richard, introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Richard Sever. I'm the Chief Science and Strategy Officer of OpenRXiv, which is the non-profit organization that operates the preprint servers bioRxiv and medRxiv. And so data obviously critical as they're the basis for supporting the claims made in preprints. So we do post supplementary data alongside bioRxiv and medRxiv articles. But I think more importantly, we recognize that the preprint is just one point in a constellation of research objects. And so we have partnerships with organizations like Dryad to surface these so that if somebody is reading about the ideas in a preprint, they can link out from that narrative to data deposited elsewhere, which can be interrogated, serves as a kind of audit trail, and thus provides additional trust signals for readers.
Thank you so much to you all. And interestingly, and I don't think we had discussed that in advance, but all of you ended up touching on the research integrity and access and how, having the data, at least underpinning preprints or reviewed preprints and journal articles and ensuring that data is fully curated is critical to ensure that the research we're putting out there is trusted. So in my brief introduction, I talked briefly about the process of that people need to go through to share data. And one of the biggest hurdles that people can go through can be, as Jenny was pointing out, people have submitted a manuscript to a journal, and the journal has a policy that requires the data to be publicly available, again, in the interest of ensuring that the data can be reproduced and reused. From your perspectives, maybe, and Brooke, may I start with you, if that's okay, because you're dealing with researchers on a day-to-day basis in improving the quality of their data sets. And you're a researcher yourself as well. So can you tell us a little bit more about the process of just preparing data for consumption by others? How big of a deal you believe it is, at least from the communities you work with? And if there is anything that you at Morphobank feel that you're doing to really contribute to make that process simpler. Sorry, 3 questions in one.
No problem. So yeah, so thinking about data and data sharing really needs to be at the start of your research project as you gather data. I think this is very critical. Instead, I think the current format is someone publishes a paper or is trying to, and the publisher saying, no, you need to make sure you have your data deposited somewhere and cite it. But really, the whole process of the research, you need to be thinking about your data quality, reusing it, letting other people, including the reviewers, see the data, and making sure it is somewhere where it is accessible and follows some kind of standards and guidelines. And I know that depending on the type of data it is, maybe there's not guidelines. You could put your data into a generalized repository or a specialized repository, and that really influences how you set up the format. But the whole thinking about your data, you need to be thinking about the whole research process and how you're going to share it. With the repository that I work with, Morphobank, it's a little unique in the fact that as people are working together on their research, they can be adding the data to a specific project in Morphobank. And so researchers are collaborating together, actively adding data, and then when they're done and they're ready to publish their work, they can also publish the data. That's a little different than if someone were to do their whole project and say, oh, at the end, let me just deposit it somewhere. What other questions were you asking, Maria? Apologize.
No, yeah, I think I was keen to know, as an organization, what kind of procedures you have in place to mitigate those challenges, and I think we covered that in some way. And as I was listening to you, I was pondering about this earlier today, and it's often something that, as someone working in a data platform, in a data repository, I think about. And Richard, maybe if you don't mind, if I put you on the spotlight. So Brooke was telling us about the need for researchers to be really proactive in thinking about data preparation as soon as their research project starts. But as stakeholders in the research ecosystem that work closely with the researchers to disseminate their outputs, what do you think? And I think you'll have an interesting view on this. What do you think, for example, bioRxiv and medRxiv's role can be in not necessarily just responding to policy requirements? The Gates Foundation requires open data, but also trying to be proactive in driving behavior change so that we do live in that constellation of organizations working together to have open science at its full. So what's your perspective in terms of should we be proactive or responding to policy? And Jenny, I may appreciate your views on this as well.
Well, I mean, I think one of the advantages that bioRxiv and medRxiv have is that paper can be revised at any time. So the paper, in some ways, can be the signal that draws attention to the deposition of the data, for example. And there's an opportunity there for a feedback loop. And so we've certainly seen examples where somebody will post a paper on bioRxiv, and then somebody will say, hey, hang on a second, where are the data? And then they then a revised version comes on bioRxiv, and they've linked out to the data at somewhere like Dryad. So I think there's an opportunity there because, one of the key things, one of the key discussions here is to make data sharing not performative, but to make it have utility. So there's an opportunity there for the community to say, okay, you have shared the data. Can you share it in this form in which we can use? Can you do it again? So I think there's an opportunity there to be a sort of a venue for dialogue between data users and the authors. It's sometimes people say, and obviously this is an important aspect of our partnership with Dryad. People sometimes say, oh, well, can bioRxiv enforce data sharing? And our answer there is we ourselves can't, because we could. How do we know what the data should be? How do we know that they're complete, etc.? But we can at least provide a forum for the authors to put out their claims linked to the associated data, and then that be an opportunity for conversation and for the community to give feedback about what they need to see.
Thank you. Well put. Jenny or Wei Mun, any further additions to this topic, given kind of with your publisher hat on?
Uh,
Go ahead, Wei Mun.
so in terms of data kind of like deposition, I understand there's quite a lengthy process in the sense that you have to prepare the data, deposit it, curate the data, and the process takes time. So ideally, this should be kind of as a I think Brooke kind of mentioned it. This should be something that's planned very early on rather than left to the very end. The problem sometimes is that you get to the point of publication and they realize they don't have the data available, and the research has moved on, and that can be a headache. So if they plan earlier, I think that helps. So in terms of from a journal perspective, what we can offer is like prompt the authors very early in the process, kind of lay out our expectations and what kind of data needs to be shared. Also point them to potential kind of repositories they could deposit their data, point them to resources such as fair sharing. So fair sharing is a curated registry of databases and repositories where they can host their data. Also, I think Richard kind of mentioned having some kind of integration. So we also have an integration with Dryad. So authors can go through the submission form, and we can kind of have the option for them to deposit their data to a repository. So some kind of ideas there.
Yeah, I'm going to say, obviously, the best time to think about managing your data and archiving your data is before you started gathering your data. But that's the kind of lesson that people tend to learn through bitter experience rather than rather than the easy way. If you're very lucky, it was your supervisor's bitter experience. But so there are lots of resources out there. The BES has a guide to data management that's currently being revised, but the current version is still freely available. And there are lots of other resources out there, but people don't tend to realize that they need them until they've, well, found out the hard way, as I say. We also are integrated with Dryad because we want to make it as easy as possible for people to archive their data. That doesn't fix the problem that it takes time, and it will take you more time if you have not thought about it already. It is much easier to plan before you set out and before you gather your data, and then everything is, generally speaking, the amount of additional work it takes is much less than if you're trying to, pick up all of your supplies, work out where your notebooks were, look at your CSVs. Everything is just easier if you start before you think you need to. I recognize even as I say that that's not particularly helpful advice, because again, like, you either know this already or you think you're going to do this, and it's on any given day it's easier to not do it. So your future self will thank you a lot for taking the time to just look at some data metrics. And I said the BES has one, but also, to be honest, you can just search for research data management guide or research data management workflow, anything like that. There are so many resources out there that will make it easier for you. Yeah. But there's no way of avoiding doing the thing. You still have to do the thing.
Yeah, absolutely, Jenny. Thank you. And I really like the way you put it. And it's something, that a terminology that we often use as well whenever talking to researchers is think about your future self. And if you look back into your data in 5 years' time, will you understand what you've done? Hence the importance of properly documenting it. And that brings me to another topic that we discussed earlier, which was, and I think, Richard, you were the one using the term, the utility of the data. So thinking about why is it that we're putting it out there? From your different perspectives, what has been, maybe Brooke, starting with you again, and thinking about the process you go through to ensure and maximize data reuse. What are the current limitations you're seeing, especially also from the colleagues and you as a researcher? What kind of mitigation processes could we have in place to ensure that we're maximizing the utility of these data we're putting forward?
Yeah, so go ahead. Go ahead, Richard. You can.
No, I wasn't sure whether you're pointing to me, Maria, but go ahead.
Okay, I could just make a quick comment. So for data reuse is to definitely make sure you have all of the data. So for my experience with our specialized repository, Morphobank, we have people that don't have all the information. They just want to upload part of it. Where they're uploading maybe just a character matrix, but are missing critical information that it could be in a supplemental data file, but it may not be. And so thinking about how things are going to be reused in the future, all of the pieces really need to be there, and you need to be able to share everything. Richard, go ahead and go. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, not at all. I mean, I would echo that. I mean, I think the one of the things that's really important here, and I think Brooke, you said this earlier, is to think in advance about this. Because the real answer about data use is it really depends. There are lots of domain specific aspects. There are lots of different data types. Pretty much every form of data that anybody collects in any scientific experiment undergoes a series of kind of like processing, summarization, extraction, and representation steps, be it kind of like nucleotide sequences, protein sequences, whatever. And so you need to have an advance, kind of community guidelines on which is the thing you're going to be sharing. What's the utility of the piece that you're sharing, rather than the kind of, is it the raw data, is it the processed data, etc. And there are obvious examples where the data use is critical. I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day, when we think about AlphaFold, this incredible advance in protein structure prediction, and really the success story there was less DeepMind developing the AI to allow this to happen than the protein database having all the structures, all the data there that everybody could train on. That works very well for protein structures. It's less clear in other areas like imaging, like basic research data, what should be shared and when. And I think that's where we really need to have a kind of conversations, domain and community specific conversations about the utility, to make sure that this isn't just performative. And that was I think one of the problems with the NIH mandate was it was saying, share your data. It didn't tell you where or how. And those answers will be very, very different depending on the type of data. So I think, we really need to, planning in advance and thinking about what the community needs and can benefit from is critical.
Thank you, Richard. Wei Mun, as someone who works with a wide range of subject areas within biomedicine and life sciences, have you got any further view, especially on how to guide different communities to do this and do this in an effective way that promotes reuse?
So I think as kind of Richard kind of touched upon, all sorts of data have different levels of like community agreed standards of how data should be shared. I think the thing is a lot of researchers, when they go about sharing their data, they don't know where to put the data. That's a big problem. It's not also, we don't have, as a journal, we don't have the capacity to necessarily see, let's say someone provides their data and they say their data is in so and so repository, they provided data that we can't, we don't necessarily have the tech. It's not possible to capture it unless someone manually goes through it, every article, reads the methods, and has the in-depth knowledge. We don't know if the complete set of data is being provided. So I think it's really up to the authors to kind of. I think it's a difficult thing. I mean, it's also if we look at limitations in the sense of limitations. Let's say they've done the research, they're publishing with eLife. There are some instances where there are limitations to sharing the data. So if they don't have the consent, or there are certain legal reasons like GDPR where the sensitive data can't be shared, that may kind of limit reuse of the data.
Yeah, thank you, Wei Mun. Jenny, as a publisher working for a society, you're kind of in this. I like to think it in this way, but you can share your view that you're in a privileged position to have direct access to communities, and you know, societies are key pillars of community engagement within those disciplines. And for example, a really interesting case for Dryad is that, you know, the data archiving policies in ecology and evolution were mostly driven by scientists working in society journals, and that felt the need to have a place where, especially, you know, this generalist data could be shared. How has it been in recent years to engage with your members to think about these broadly? And now I would like to potentially link to a point that Ed was putting on the chat, which is also of the importance of thinking about archiving data alongside the other related objects like code. And I know that at the BS you've been doing some interesting experiments around that.
Yeah. So I would say that on the whole, ecology especially moved towards data sharing very quickly. I know that when the first year that Functional Ecology, which is the journal I worked on at the time, mandated data archiving, we had emails from people saying, I will never publish with you if you go through with this. Within a year, they were publishing with us, you know, and there are other places they could publish. We're not the only game in town. I would say that on the whole, ecology just leans towards it. There are restrictions. Sometimes there is third-party data use, which can't be published because the people that wrote the paper don't own that data. And sometimes there are restrictions because publishing the data would endanger the study species. I think people that work with rare species or birds or many things where they just know that and they'll have to transform the data in some way, if possible. It might not be possible in order to keep that study species safe. So there are always going to be practical limitations to what data is out there. That said, on the whole, and with some qualifiers, people are pretty keen to have data be generally available. I know that there are also some concerns about people, one group publishes the data and then another group with maybe better, faster computers able to do modeling more quickly then publishes first. And there's a question of, will the people that have access to, say, data sources that gather the data, are they being denied opportunity? I've not known that to happen, but I know that it is a fear that some people have. So there are some limitations, but on the whole, it's pretty, people are pretty keen. With regards to code, yeah, I believe that just as there should be at a minimum enough data available to that somebody outside could rerun and get your results, there should be code available that people can rerun and get the results. Code decay is a very real problem, and I don't know that there's a good solution to that. But there are lots of good solutions to the problem of code archiving. There are lots of, GitHub is linked with Zenodo, and also you can archive your code in Dryad, so you can preserve what's there. In terms of actual reproducibility of code, properly documenting your code, that's a whole other issue. And we have a whole other guide just devoted to reproducible code, because it's not easy. Again, as with data, people need to think about it kind of before they start doing the thing. But actually, just as with good data management, there are lots of guides out there. There's lots of resources out there, and doing anything is better than doing nothing. So even taking small steps, you don't have to be absolutely perfect in what you do. It's still better to take like half a step than to take no steps. Yeah.
Jenny, if I may ask, in terms of that guidance that BES makes available for authors around documenting practices for code. First question, maybe how strict are you with the quality of that documentation, and who checks for it? Is it something you encourage your reviewers to do?
So basically, it depends on papers where the code is essentially the product, is the main part of the paper. So on methods, we publish applications papers where, generally speaking, the code is what the paper is about. We do require the data to be, we do require that code is archived. You can do so in a safe and functioning record, but people need to know what it was at source. Reviewing code is difficult, and although in some cases it will be possible for people to review it, to run it themselves, there are other times where people will be dealing with just such huge packages that it is not feasible to ask reviewers. They require a level of equipment that people just don't easily have access to. So people can, test, they can see what they can see. They can see if it makes sense. They might not be able to run the thing directly themselves. It's not an ideal solution, but I also note that if you publish papers, there is a solution to people publishing papers that turn out to be fundamentally incorrect in a way that is damaging to the research community, and that is retraction. So there are already, in some ways, mechanisms in place that will hopefully help keep people following best practice. Nobody wants to see that happen. It'd be great if everyone did everything well and good and as they should. But when they don't, there are kind of quite established pathways to ensure that the record is corrected.
Thank you, Jenny. I'm going to open the floor for questions or reactions. We still have a couple of other things we wanted to go through, but to ensure that you have the time to participate. Josefina, are you happy actually to if your audio works and you're comfortable in doing so, just raise your question verbally. Otherwise, I can read it out loud.
Sure, I can do that.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you.
I was wondering if you had thought about the risk of parachute research, specifically if high resource institutions have access to Global South data that maybe just because they have access to publication or they have budget for publication in high impact journals, that maybe they benefit from open data more.
I know that Oh, sorry, Richard, you got your hand up. Am I jumping in? Okay.
No, go ahead.
I know that that's a real fear that people have. Again, I don't have examples of this. I do want to point out that open data goes both ways. I am going to say that if you're from a well-off institution in, you know, in France or wherever, it's probably a lot easier for you to go to studies to field sites in Latin America and North America and Australia and to get data for yourself than it is if you are from an underfunded institution in just in any one place. Like open data does benefit everyone. Again, like it is potentially a fear. There are some journals that have embargo periods on data to help address that fear. But again, like I don't know that it's a worse problem than any other example of parachute science, you know.
Thank you, Jenny. Yeah, Richard, do you want to chime in as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think this just gets to one of the points that you're actually going to you wanted to raise later, Maria. But I think that the key thing here is to think about the changing attitudes to this. There's, I remember many years ago there was a New England Journal editorial talking about data parasites, and there was this idea that people would come along and take your data. And I think what we've seen in recent years is a real change from this kind of concept of that there's, you hoard your data, you squeeze as much out of it as possible and only then can somebody else come along. And it's all around this fear of academic credit. But I think if we can address the academic credit issue separately with data papers and ensure things are cited appropriately, then the problem goes away. I remember seeing a talk by Casey Green, a professor at University of Colorado, and he said, the problem is that people see data like oil. It's this finite resource that other people might use, and really we should think about it as kind of something that we're liberating information for ourselves and other people to use. So I think if we can get to that, and I think that's happening. I mean, the fact that the whole data parasite thing became a meme that everybody used and said, "Hey, I'm a data parasite." So I think as long as we can do it in a way that there's sufficient credit for the people who generate the data, but I don't like the idea that people hoard data for fear of this, because it's not just data. It's this pervasive fear in academia that people are going to be scooped and that somebody's going to get the credit. And I think that's much less about data and much more about a problem in academia, in the prestige economy.
Yeah, great point.
Can
And
I
anyone else? Yeah, go ahead, Brooke.
can I jump in? Yeah. So I mean, if someone is publishing their data in a repository, they should be getting a DOI or some kind of permanent link for it. So that itself, you release your data. If anyone else reuses it, they should be citing your data. So unless they're stealing it and they're not actually citing it, you are getting the credit for your data being used.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brooke. I was just also just seeing a really interesting comment from Cassandra on the chat, really highlighting why actually the retraction mechanism that Jenny was talking about, it should be perceived as a positive experience for the ongoing preservation and curation of the scholarly record, especially when we have our peers looking into the data and the code and pointing out errors that were not caught through the peer review process. So Richard, you were talking about that instance of the data parasites, and that seems like a very positive improvement in the way people have been perceiving the practice of sharing data. So I wonder if any others in the panel would like to comment on positive shifts they've seen in recent years, or in the term working in scholarly publishing and scholarly communication, or just simply how things have changed since you've been working in this world. Wei Mun, if you'd like to go first.
I think so. If we kind of look at the kind of transition timeline, and in the very beginning, perhaps data was kind of hoarded by groups and they were less reluctant to share. But over time, there has been kind of a wave as in the sense that people are more willing to share their data. There have been more agreed standards in data sharing for different types of data. And then a lot of journals introducing data sharing statements and then to kind of the more kind of recent time, as Richard and several others of the panelists mentioned, data being recognized as a research object. So it's a key output in the sense that by having a DOI linked to the data, underlying data, the authors can be recognized and can receive recognition for their research and for the data.
Yeah, that all good progress. Thank you very much. And then now, as we're talking earlier, another big change that we're seeing is how potentially, AI can just, you can have OpenAI just going through your repository and harvesting amounts of data. We're seeing that at Dryad. How can we mitigate those risks and equally mitigate the fear for researchers in sharing data that could be used by others and by machines? Richard, you had some interesting views on that, so I'll let you go first.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I would start by saying, I mean, you talked about the risks of this happening. I think one thing we should think about, particularly here, is back to that point about data ownership and data not being like oil. There's a couple of things here that are, I think, really important. First of all, I mean, I have friends in the music industry who are terrified about LLMs killing their jobs. We saw the people in the writers guilds furious about this over in Hollywood. But as an academic, it's completely different. The data isn't a creative work that's that you're putting out there with your name on. You're putting it out there because you want to put knowledge out into the world. You want to put knowledge out into the world for people to read it, and so you also want it to put it out there for it to be consumed by machines. So I think again it comes back to credit. So I mean I don't think that's necessary. I mean there's an entire another webinar we can have about the dominance of certain organizations within the LLM AI space and control of that space. That's a separate thing. But I think on principle, you're putting information out in the world for it to be used by people and by machines. So I'm not sure I think that's a risk. I think how that's done, there's a separate conversation about that. The other point to make here is that in contrast with some of those creative works, data, at least in the United States, data is not copyrightable, right? Data it's a fact, so it's not. So somebody's not stealing something that you own. It's not like drawing a painting or something like that. They're expressions of fact. They're not copyrighted information, so they can be used by data mining. So I think we need to think about it in those terms. And I think now a lot of the certainly the legal judgments on LLM use of text, for example, in papers is that it's totally fine, but we need to think about what is it that we're worried about, and we're back to this credit and provenance issue. So I think that's what we should be focusing on, not trying to avoid this happening because it's kind of what you're supposed to be doing as a scientist, but doing it in a way that you receive credit. The source of the data is credited. I mean, that's the problem with an LLM is somebody asks a question and they get an answer and it doesn't actually tell them where the answer came from. And if it does, it's not actually necessarily right that was the source of within its training set. So I think really that should be the conversation about provenance and credit.
Good point. Yeah, excellent point. Anyone else who would like to chime in on this topic? So maybe Richard, picking on what you were just saying around the importance of attribution, and with data being there being facts, it's still good practice, or it should be within academia to cite and attribute others people's work, and that's how this conversation should be progressed in future years. So from the perspectives of the organizations you will work with, What is it that you think we should do and you should do as an organization to ensure that at least the first step we're encouraging researchers to take in how they are sharing data is thinking about that future? So kind of thinking about the provenance of the data and ensuring their credit and attribution. I don't know who'd like to start. Jenny, do you want have any thoughts from you from the society in journal's perspective?
I'm sorry, I missed that. I didn't hear that.
Oh, okay. No, I
Sorry.
was asking if you wanted to offer your perspective from the society and the journals on how, yeah, what policies or processes you're putting in place to encourage researchers to put data in places where you feel the data will be safeguarded. So even though,
I mean,
I think, yeah, Richard's point was around the data will be open and could be ingested positively into machines. How can we ensure that
I
people
mean,
are protected?
we have criteria for where data can be archived to be for a paper to be published in our journals. We have guidance on what your archive data should look like when you're storing your data. What is a rectal place? Like it does need to have a reasonable guarantee of permanency. Versioning is great, but people need to be able to see the snapshot that you're referencing when you did your paper. A reasonable guarantees of accessibility. So it can't be, on request, because what happens if that person that you request it from leaves academia or is hit by a bus? Like there's so many things that could go wrong. It needs to be an automated process at some level for you to be able to access that data. And that will mean that it is open to, generally speaking, to use by things like AI tools. I don't know that there is a thing that we can do if somebody that is building an AI tool does not want to recognize where that came from. It is very difficult to do that. We can make it so that data is, archived with a DOI that the data creators are credited within the data source. There are good README files, but again, like if we do need the people that are building these tools to be willing to acknowledge them, and there needs to be both some kind of carrot and stick for them to do so.
Thank you. Richard, yeah, please go next.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Brooke or Jenny mentioned the DOIs, and I'm always at pains to point out DOI is a guarantee that this is a permanent indicator of this object, but it isn't actually a guarantee that that object will exist in the future. And so I think that's, this is where I sort of get on my high horse a little bit. I think that's what we need. We've got to the point where data are considered first-class objects. They're citable. You have data papers, but I think there's a general lament in the community as a whole that the funding for databases, the funding for resources that store these things in perpetuity is metastable, unstable, not guaranteed. And I think that's where, we need to look to funders, and we need to look to the academic community to support this. Because if we think this data are so important, these data are so important, then we need to have them available in the future. So we need confidence that these resources will still be there in the future so they can be accessed. And unfortunately, in many respects, it's considered a fairly boring thing, but there are like really boring pieces of infrastructure we need to fund. And the metaphor that's often used here is the fountain, and it's always that everybody likes the gleaming fountain, but nobody wants to pay for the plumbing, and the data really are the plumbing. And so I think that's I think the kind of webinars like we're having now, is recognition of the importance of data needs to be funded by a concerted push to say the infrastructure that allows this to happen and allows those permanent identifiers to literally represent permanent research objects in the scholarly record is absolutely critical.
Yep, so that's music to my ears. That's a conversation we have over and over again with funders and others at Dryad. Okay, we're almost out at time. Does anyone else from the audience would like to share views, reactions before we finish today? And feel free to just raise your hand if you'd like to speak or share your comments on the chat. Lucia, yeah, please go. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, I really enjoyed the panel. Thank you for lots of insight. I have one practical question. We probably all agree that journals are one of the key players in introducing those policies and following them. But quite often they have policy and they don't follow their own policy. For example, you see a paper where authors clearly collected their data, and then in data availability statement, they say there's no data associated with this paper or data is available on request. So how do we make journals accountable for following their own policies?
Jenny, yeah, please go. And Wei Mun, if you have anything to share, please go too.
You have to confront them, to be honest. So
I tried, and they were like, we don't care.
We don't care. So there is a reputational risk at not standing by your policies, which you would hope that is incentive enough. There's also just voting with your feet. You know, it shouldn't be easy for a journal to get away with that. It shouldn't be easy for the authors to get away with that either.
It's super easy.
It's a bit of community policing. It is, again, like I can't speak to that journal. I don't know what their situation is.
Okay. That particular actually journal claims to be promoting open science values and practices. So one of the examples. And it's very popular.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
it happens across all journals. I think the problem is they have policies, but they are happy with whatever authors provide, because we know that the sharing increases, but the quality is extremely bad. So people can post whatever. You sometimes look at the data and it's just additional figures. But it's not even the data that's posted. So editors don't check. Nobody validates. There are some few exceptions with journals that started doing that, but most journals don't validate what is submitted as data.
On the BES journals, when a paper is published, the assistant editor checks that it looks all right, that it's archived. They don't have the facility to check, like, is this data absolutely matching? But they can see, does this match? That they've said that they've gathered this, and I can see, and then they've said that they have no data. Well, that doesn't make sense. So they do. But again, we're lucky we've got an in-house editorial team that has the time to do that, and we have the ability to do that. That's certainly not true of every journal. So you do need to have systems in place at the journal as well as an intent. Again, we are a society published journal. Journals that have that as a policy should keep to it. Again, it's very difficult to deal with somebody that just refuses. So I don't really have a solution to that. But I can tell you what good practice looks like, and there should be consequences for failing to meet the standards that you have set yourself.
Yeah, I would encourage you to write to the editor-in-chief, because you'll know the journal stuff as well in doing so.
I'm planning a project on that actually with students and graduate students at a class in the future. So we will do an action, but it takes time and resources on our behalf as well.
Absolutely. We're a little bit over time. Lucia, thank you so much for the question. And thank you everyone for attending. A huge thank you to our panelists. You're all brilliant. Thank you so much for SORTEE as well, for hosting this session with Dryad. The recording will be made available, and I hope you take advantage of the remainder events throughout Love Data Week, if you're signing up for anything else this week. Thank you so much for your time, and lovely to see you all. Good.